Ah, howdy my totally as always tubular gamers. We're back with, you guessed it, another video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. If you're new here, maybe stick around for a while. I got a video it's certainly going to cause a war. Today we're talking about overrated video games.
Now, when discussing video games, the term overrated is a bit vague. It's not always super clear what exactly someone means when they say a game is overrated. Yes, the term overrated has a concrete definition, but when discussing video games, and if you say a game is overrated, do you mean like that the critics said the game was really good and you disagree, or the general sentiment online is that the game is really good and you disagree, or maybe the game just sold incredibly well and you don't think it should have? Maybe it's a combination of all three, or it's something else entirely I didn't even mention. And so for today's video, when I talk about games that are overrated, here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about games that I think are good, even great, but I don't think that they're the be-all, end-all that critics and some people online have made them out to be. When I say people, I just mean in the general circles I hang out in, other YouTubers and influencers, and some forums I lurk in from time to time. I want to make it really clear for this video though, I think all of these are good games. I'll say it even slower. These are all good games. But I don't think these games are some of the greatest of all time. I've seen critics in plenty of circles and people online say that these are some of the greatest pieces of media you could ever find, and I wholeheartedly disagree. But as they say, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, and this is based purely off my experiences, my thoughts, feelings, memories, nostalgia, etc., etc. This is my list, and everybody's going to have a very unique, individualized list when it comes to overrated games. I feel like the only list that could really be more individualized than overrated games is like favorite games of all time, where everybody's going to have a different list. Everybody's going to have different opinions on these games, and so this is me sharing mine. I welcome you to share yours down below. I know how much gamers love it when you disagree with them or have a different opinion with them, and you can have civil conversation that don't involve swear words or name calling. It happens all the time with gamers online. And so please, I welcome everybody watching this video to share your opinion down below on some overrated games. Whether you agree with the list, disagree with the list, whether you got beef with me or someone else, doesn't really matter. Just share how you're feeling, and I'll do my best to go through all of the comments. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. With that, please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. I am just a one-man army here. It's just me playing these games, talking, scripting, editing, everything. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. If you even made it to this part of the video, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Let's get on to it. What's the first game? Well, I thought go big or go home. I might as well start with a bomb. Here we have The Last of Us Part 2. Now, this game has been highly contested from the moment it was even announced, and all these years later, people are still debating nearly every aspect of the game. I say nearly because I think we can all agree that the game looks amazing graphically. We can agree on that at least, right? When it comes to good things for The Last of Us 2, there's plenty of great things about this game. I think the gunplay's good. As basic as the stealth and crafting and survival elements are, I still think they're well implemented. I think the level design is pretty solid also, but there are things that I don't care for in The Last of Us Part 2. The story obviously is just a huge can of worms, and I'm not going to spoil anything here. I don't like to spoil games. I will just say that while this game did make me feel emotions that I've really never felt before from a video game, and I've played over 2,000 games, there were still aspects of it that I didn't really like. Maybe that's the point, and I'm just getting worked here, but yeah, there were parts that I just did not care for, particularly the last fourth of the game. I was really disappointed by the ending. I thought it just fell kind of flat, and I didn't really like it. Again, maybe I'm not supposed to, or I just missed some deeper meaning or something, but I just didn't really care for it. The other thing that I don't really care for The Last of Us Part 2 is the pacing. In my opinion, this game just goes on way too long. It feels incredibly dragged out during certain sections, and I totally get why certain sections exist. I get why you play as someone other than Ellie and they want you to see things from a different point of view. That's not really the issue I have. The issue I have is that some sections and parts of this game really just drag, and I'm like, can we get on with it? Can we get to the next area? And even though I like the gameplay and I think it's good, you really start to see the cracks in the gameplay when it is as long as it is. It starts to expose the gameplay and you kind of realize how surface level the gameplay is. Again, the focus has always been on the story and the world, characters, emotions you feel, but when the game is 20 plus hours long, yeah, the gameplay does start to drag a little. I can only push dumpsters and climb things slowly for so long, and I get that the game is telling an emotional story, but sometimes it feels like these slow walking segments where you listen to dialogue and exposition, it just feels like it takes forever. If the game was 25 hours long, I'd say maybe like 6 hours of it is actual real gameplay. And so to circle back, I just don't think the pacing is the best. It feels a bit dragged out. If you compare it to the first Last of Us, that game is half the length of this and it has fantastic pacing where it's constantly mixing things up and it is a good mix of exposition and dialogue but also gameplay. We could really be here all day critically examining how integral pacing is to an overall game's experience, but I do have other games to talk about. I've already redone this section like 3 times. What I'm trying to say is I think The Last of Us 2 is pretty good, but it just takes too damn long. And if it was always intended to be this long, I wish they could have done a few more things to really spice up the gameplay. And it's thanks to this that I just have zero desire to honestly go back to this game. I've played through the first Last of Us several times, but Part 2? No, not once, and I don't plan on it either. But enough about Last of Us Part 2. Hopefully I didn't post too much cringe and lose subscriber. I got plenty more games to talk about, so let's move on to the next one. And here we got one that I know is going to upset people. I have GoldenEye 007 released for the N64. Now, I've shared my opinion on this game a few times and been told it's a hot take, but I'm sticking to it. And yes, I understand how important GoldenEye was to first-person shooters and the industry in general. It was a landmark first-person shooter. That I can't deny, but I think that if you come back to this game in current year and you've never played GoldenEye before, I don't think you're going to love it all that much. The multiplayer, yeah, the multiplayer is pretty much uncontested. I've had tons of fun in the multiplayer, but the single player, yeah, I think it's just alright. And you might go, oh, well, people always gas this game up just because of the multiplayer. I see plenty of people gassing up the single player as well. And I'm not talking about just any kind of gas here. I'm talking about that overpriced premium shit. People really do gas the single player up, and I have issues with it. That sounded rather confrontational, but a video like this, yeah, it's going to be as confrontational as it gets. When it comes to the controls, never been big on it. I mean, the 3 prongs on the N64 controller, the trike of controllers, we already know all about that. But at least the game's been re-released officially so you can play it with a different controller and have a bit of a cleaner image. When it comes to the actual shooting, I think it's fine, it gets the job done, and the AI can actually be pretty dynamic. My issues really come from the levels and the objectives. I feel like these levels just aren't all that well designed for the most part. When it's super linear and straightforward, it's fine and it's actually pretty fun, but when you're in these more open, non-linear areas and you're given these just rather vague objectives, I don't think it's all that fun. I don't think these levels are all that well designed. Sometimes the objectives are just low-key obtuse and you're just wandering around going, what the hell do I even do? And the harder the difficulty, the more objectives you get, and they just become more and more confusing. I always played this game on like the easiest difficulty just so I would have the least amount of objectives, and you know, call me unobservational or just a fucking Neanderthal who wants to just shoot bad guy, go pew pew, but yeah, that's what I really wanted to do in this game, exploring these areas, combing these levels for 20 minutes to figure out that I needed to push a button or pick something up. On top of this, the frame rate can be pretty dodgy, and some levels in this game are just terrible, where you get absolutely swarmed by enemies. They're like infinitely respawning. You're trying to figure out what the hell you're even supposed to do, and you're just gonna get gunned down. You can't actually get health in this game either, only armor, and there's no checkpoints, so it can be extremely just tedious and frustrating. Well, at least we got the pause music. Then there's the spiritual successor. I always thought Perfect Dark was the better game of these two. Sure, it doesn't have 007, it doesn't have the cool aesthetic and atmosphere, and the music, it's not as good as GoldenEye's, but I just always thought Perfect Dark had better gunplay, better levels, more straightforward design, and arguably better multiplayer. But GoldenEye is the one that always gets all the love, and I think GoldenEye is a good game, but when I hear people say it's one of the greatest first-person shooters of all time, I disagree. Is it one of the most important FPS games ever? Absolutely, but there's a clear distinction between important and good, and I think this game's legacy has kind of inflated its status to the point that I would say yes, it is overrated in my opinion. So for this entry, I got a double header. I got Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Valhalla. I know there are plenty of people that don't like these games, but I have seen tons of critics and people say that these are not only some of the best Assassin's Creed games, but some of the best modern open world games, and I wholeheartedly disagree. I have played every single Assassin's Creed game, and I like all of them to a certain extent. I can even appreciate that they tried to take a different direction for the series because it really was starting to get stale. But despite that, I got plenty of issues with Valhalla and Odyssey. These games are absolutely gargantuan. They are massive in size, and I know plenty of people just love how big they are, how open they are, and how much there is to see and do. And yeah, it's impressive, but it's also both of these games' biggest issues. They are way, way too big. They're incredibly bloated, and are some of the longest video games I've ever finished, and I didn't even do like any of the side content. Like, these games just go on, and they feel endless. They truly do feel endless. And I've heard some people say, oh, play through Odyssey and Valhalla like a live service game where, you know, you just kind of chip away at it a little bit every week. And my response is, what? What kind of coping is this? This is a single player game that you should be able to play in long bursts. If you can't play it in long bursts and you gotta treat it like a live service, that means the game is repetitive, dull, and it gets stale. And that's exactly what Odyssey and Valhalla are. Both games have good combat, great ship combat, decent stealth, basic parkour that works, but when it comes to the quests and the structure, it just falls apart. These games are way too big for their own good. I found these open worlds to just be dull, empty, and not really exciting to go through. And when it comes to the quests, I could say almost the same thing. I found them dull, repetitive, and a lot of them felt the same, where it's like, go talk to somebody, go to a new area, kill somebody, or pick something up, bring it back. It's not as bad in Valhalla, but in Odyssey in particular, man, these quests felt so similar. I could not tell you the difference between tons of these side quests. You might go, oh, just don't do the side quests then. You clearly haven't played these games and experienced the bullshit level scaling Ubisoft has set up, where they want you to actually just buy the time savers. Otherwise, you just gotta grind, and it just takes absolutely forever. It was genuinely mind-numbing, where I would just turn my brain off as I'm playing this game because it is all so similar, especially in Odyssey. And then when I booted up Valhalla, yeah, it is a bit better, and the game has a bit more variety with its objectives. It is the better game, but it still got incredibly mind-numbing. It's just way too big for its own good. It does not need to be this big. These are some solid 7 out of 10 Ubisoft games, and they've got plenty of good aspects, but when I hear people say that these are some of the best AC games or open world games, I laugh, because at their best, they're alright, and at their worst, they're just repetitive slogs. So our next game is absolutely going to piss some people off, but I have Grand Theft Auto 4. Now, before you block me and cuss me out, hear me out for a second. I think GTA 4 still is one of the best GTAs. I think it has a fantastic story. It has excellent characters. The story of Nico and his cousin trying to make it in America, it really is great stuff. It's genuinely better than GTA 5. Nico is just such a good protagonist. And the world that Rockstar crafted here is nothing short of spectacular. There's a high attention to detail, it feels very lived in, and it really is one of the best open worlds of that generation. But big but here, I do have some issues with Grand Theft Auto 4 that prevent it from me saying it's the best of the GTAs, or maybe the greatest open world game of all time, which this game has been hyped up to, especially by the critics. If you go to Metacritic, this is like one of the highest games ever. It's in like the top 5, and yeah, I got some issues with GTA 4. I'm gonna just get into it and say that I have never liked how this game feels. I didn't like it then, and I really don't like it now. Rockstar took this very realistic, weighted approach when it came to the feel of the characters, the driving, and the physics in general. Older GTA games and GTA 5 have a nice mix of realistic and weighted, but it's still kind of goofy and arcadey with the physics. GTA 4 falls solely on the realistic side. This game feels so sluggish. Nico just feels so heavy and slow, and it feels like you're underwater a lot of the time. And you know, it would be one thing if just the movement speed wasn't all that great, but everything you do feels so slow. The shooting feels sluggish. Getting into cover and getting out of it feels like it takes forever. And then the driving. I just don't like the driving in this game. I don't like how the cars feel. I don't like how sluggish they feel. I feel like this game doesn't have a great sense of speed. Even when you do go hella fast, it doesn't feel like you're going as fast as you would in, say, San Andreas or GTA 5. And I'm not saying it's bad, it still is good, I just really don't care for it. I don't really care for the driving, I don't really care for the combat, and really the gunplay in general. And what are you doing a majority of the game? You're either driving around or you're getting into firefights. And it just didn't resonate with me. Also the music, this is obviously very subjective, but I always thought the radio stations were just kind of trash in GTA 4. The game has plenty of amazing things, it has a great attention to detail, again, amazing story. We could be here all day gassing up how great GTA 4 is, but throughout the years, I have heard so many people say this is the best GTA, maybe the best open world game of all time, and I just disagree. Maybe it's just people speaking in hyperbole too much. I think the game is very good, but the greatest GTA, maybe the greatest game Rockstar's made, yeah, I don't agree with that one. And so here's a game you might not expect me to talk about, but I'm bringing up Inside, and you might be going, seriously, you think the small indie game is overrated? Yeah, indie games can be overrated too. I think Inside is a good game, and it has a really shocking conclusion. It's even got an interesting art style and a good aesthetic, but I just never quite understood when people were like, oh yeah, it's one of the best indie games ever, and then it won a ton of Indie Game of the Year awards, and I was just like, really? This game? Like, it's got an unsettling premise and really good pacing. Like, the pacing is genuinely good, but I didn't think it was that good. Maybe this game just has some kind of deeper meaning that totally flew over my head and I missed it, because I thought the platforming, it was fine, the puzzles were alright, the pacing, again, was quite good. And I didn't find myself bored at any moment. This is a very tightly crafted experience, but it also wasn't blowing me away. I didn't think the storytelling or the story in general was like amazing stuff here. I didn't think the platforming or the puzzles were brilliant, and the solutions weren't remarkable. They were just kind of obstacles I got through. So when I hear people say, oh, it's just an amazing platformer, great experience, I'm like, how exactly is that? Is it the level design? I didn't think that was anything particularly remarkable. Is it the moveset? Like, it's really fun to traverse in this game. The moveset is very basic for a cinematic platformer. Is it the puzzles? I didn't think the puzzles were anything all that special. So what exactly is it that makes this one of the greatest indie games of all time, Indie Game of the Year, and just a fantastic 2D platformer? The game can't coast on its visuals and vibes the entire time. There's got to be some substance here, and I feel like what Inside has is good, but nothing really beyond that, at least not for me. Maybe this is a case of me just not getting it. I didn't care all that much for Limbo either, but Limbo wasn't winning tons of awards like Inside was, and I was just kind of like, maybe I'm in the minority here, but I always thought Inside was a bit overrated. And so here's another that I'm sure plenty of people are going to disagree with. I have the 2018 God of War. Now, I love the God of War series and still think that this is a very good game. From a production standpoint, this game is incredible, actually. With the entire game taking place over one shot, the game looks incredible, the voice acting is great, the music is excellent. Like, from a production standpoint, this game is absolutely the real deal. I think the story's pretty good also, seeing Kratos grow, seeing him go from calling his son boy all the time to actually, calling him his name. Atreus certainly has growth. There's some other cool characters and even some pretty cool set pieces in this game. So why is it on this list? Well, I just have always had a bunch of little issues with this game that really prevent me from liking it as much as it feels like so many other people do. And when this game won as many Game of the Year awards as it did, I was kind of like, yeah, it's good, but I don't know if it's that good. I mean, Red Dead Redemption 2 came out the same year, and I honestly think that's the better game. And you could argue Red Dead Redemption 2 is overrated also, but I'm not arguing that today. Today I'm talking about God of War 2018, and all I gotta say is, while I think the story's really great, the pacing is quite slow. I think we can all agree that the game really does take its time to establish everything and to really get going. And I get why it takes its time. They're establishing the characters, setting, and world, but at times it honestly felt a bit sluggish to me, especially in the first half of the game. Of course, by the second half, shit really does start hitting the fan, and it gets a lot more exciting. And there are plenty of cool set pieces sprinkled throughout, but the first half, it felt like they were really taking their time and building everything up quite slowly. And the whole game, it feels like it's building up to this really grand event, and then it never actually happens in the game. It's the next game, Ragnarok, that is that big grand event. And maybe it's just me, but that always kind of bugged me, that like the whole game is really just low-key setting up the next game. And I think the next game, God of War Ragnarok, has a fantastic story, excellent pacing, and it's really interesting literally from the moment it starts. And I will concede and say that God of War Ragnarok's story would not be anywhere near as good if it wasn't for 2018 and everything it set up, but it doesn't change my opinion that I still think the game has a relatively slow pace to it. Okay, while that could be considered a nitpick, I do have a few issues with the gameplay as well. While the actual feel of the axe is really nice and throwing the axe and catching it and throwing it again feels really great and it is fun, that's all there really is to most of the combat. I remember when I first played through this game, I just went, man, the combat feels like a huge step backwards from God of War 3. In God of War 3, you had so many different weapons, there was actually some depth, there was a ton of combos. Here, it feels very basic by comparison. It's all been replaced by this axe that can come back to your hand. And while you do get the blades towards the end of the game, that's still only 2 weapons for the entire game. It feels like the combat is lacking in depth and complexity, and it feels like they traded it all in for some spectacles and fancy graphics. And the thing is it doesn't have to be one or the other. The older God of Wars proved that. There was depth, there was a ton of different weapons, there was plenty of spectacles and crazy set pieces. And I could say the same thing for Ragnarok, where you get more weapons. The combat is a lot more robust, there's more depth. And then there's still plenty of spectacles and crazy set pieces. It felt more in line with the older God of War games in a good way. I think the combat's good in 2018, but I'm not going to act like it was phenomenal. That and the camera was just always way too close for my liking, and it made it a bit easy for enemies to get the jump on you. Again, I think Dad of War is a good to great game, but I do believe it is a bit overrated. I think the sequel Ragnarok really is a big step up from 2018. It improved the combat, I think the story's way better, and I think that game is a masterpiece. But the 2018 game, I've always thought it's a bit overrated. Alright, I threw PlayStation some shade, now I'm going to throw some shade at Xbox. We have the original Halo Combat Evolved. Now, like GoldenEye, I'm not going to deny just how important this game was for not only the genre of first-person shooters, but video games in general. Xbox might not be around today if Halo was not as successful as it is. This game is legendary for that, and it was incredibly impactful. However, I think this game's legend and how impactful it was to Xbox and first-person shooters has inflated its status a little bit, especially when it comes to the single player. When it comes to the multiplayer, I really got no complaints there. I love the multiplayer in Halo 1. I've had so much fun with this game throughout the years. It really is awesome. When it comes to the campaign though, it's a different story. I'll start by saying that this game does have some fantastic levels in it. Some of the best levels of any Halo game, or really any first-person shooter, are in this game. However, if you go back and play through the entire campaign, you'll notice probably what I've noticed every time I've played through it. Wow, this game is a really great start, it has some really excellent levels, and then it just kind of nosedives for the second half. Like, I can't be alone in thinking that outside of the last mission, the second half of this game is just nowhere near as good as the first half. Really, the moment the floods show up, things just kinda spiral. One of the key reasons that Halo is as good as it is because of the combat encounters and the enemy AI. The enemy AI, particularly on the elites, is fantastic, and it makes all of the fights feel engaging and dynamic. When you fight the flood, yeah, all of this just goes out the window. You just fight swarms of these creatures who have little to no strategy. There's barely any enemy variety with them, and it just is nowhere near as fun to fight the flood as it is compared to literally every other type of enemy in the game. And it'd be one thing if they were just one enemy type that showed up here and there, maybe they're mixed in with some other enemy types, but this game has plenty of levels and several instances where you're only fighting the flood. It's just the flood. And I'm just like, man, what happened to this game? It's just nowhere near as good when you're only fighting the flood. And then these levels, I mean, you already know what I'm gonna bring up. When talking about bad levels in Halo, you gotta just immediately go to the library. This level sucks. I've always hated this level. It really is one of the worst levels in any Halo game. It goes on way too long, it's visually repetitive, it's uninteresting, and fighting the flood just isn't that fun. But the library isn't the only level I dislike in the original Halo. Really, almost all of the second half of the game, I'm just not that big on. Outside of the library, I wouldn't say that there's any bad levels. I think there's just a really big distinction in quality between the first few levels and the last few levels. And so when I hear people say, oh, Halo 1, man, that's like the best Halo of them all, Halo 1 had the best campaign, I'm just like, no, I really don't think so. I think Halo 2 and 3 have much better campaigns, and fighting the Flood is way better in 2 and 3, where there's more enemy variety with them, they have different tactics, they throw them in with other enemies. Like, fighting them in 2 and 3 is way better. And of course, you gotta give this game a little bit of credit. It was the first Halo. The game is 20 plus years old now, and it even has the Combat Evolved anniversary, and don't even get me started if you're playing through some of these later levels solo. Like, trust me, just play through Halo 1 cooperatively, you won't regret it. Even with all that, yeah, I'd still say the campaign is a bit overrated. The multiplayer though, oh, they can't touch Blood Gulch, man. This multiplayer's just always been so much fun. And here we have Spider-Man 2. not Marvel's Spider-Man 2 for PS5. I'm not going to have that game on a list like this. I was part of that game's production for years. I don't think it's overrated. No, I'm actually talking about the movie tie-in game that came out in the mid-2000s, and you might go, seriously? You're talking about a movie tie-in game on a list like this? Really? What's your problem, bro? I'll tell you what my problem is. I've seen over the last, 10, 15 years, so many people hyping this game to all hell. Oh, dude, Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube, you just had to be there. It was so innovative and revolutionary. It was the best superhero game at the time. It still is like the best superhero game. It's the best Spider-Man game. There's never been a Spider-Man game that's as good as Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube, and I'm just like, huh? Well, I actually was there back in the day. I love the Spider-Man 2 movie with Tobey Maguire. I still think it's a pretty good movie, and I wanted the game as a kid. I got the game, played through it, and thought it was pretty good, but I've come back to this game several times throughout the years, and every time I come back, I'm a little more and more disappointed. Yes, this was one of the first open-world superhero games, and it established a formula that's still used even nowadays. And the web slinging for the time went crazy. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. There had been web slinging in older Spider-Man games, but it was super basic and nowhere near as fun. And so yes, the game was innovative, it was creative, it felt fresh, and it was impactful. The game was considered a landmark title when it came to open world games. However, like I've said a few times already in this video, there's a very clear distinction between important and good. Yes, the open world was impressive, the web slinging was considered innovative for the time, and everybody loves the pizza mission. How could you not like the pizza mission? But I think that this game is lacking in other areas, and it's not like the game is just aged poorly. The game has certainly aged, but there are certain parts to this game that I don't even think were good for the time. Specifically the combat, which is as basic as it gets. And I've just never really liked it, even when I was younger. I've never liked how it felt. It's incredibly stiff and basic, and any mission that focuses mostly on combat is easily my least favorite type of mission. A lot of the missions in this game I don't actually think are all that good. And the open world, while it was impressive for the time, especially when it comes to its scale and how accurate it was to New York, there's really nothing to actually do in it. You just kind of swing around, there's a collectible to get, and you can go stop random crimes, which is just more of the underwhelming combat. The game's also super short. I remember beating it as a kid the weekend I got it and being a bit disappointed. I was like, wait, that's it? I'm done with the game? And then there are, of course, aspects where the game has aged, especially compared to other Spider-Man games, but I'm not really going to look at that for today's video. I'll just say that basically almost every Spider-Man game after Spider-Man 2 has better combat and better web slinging, and you would expect that. You know, this first game really laid the foundation. It established the blueprint. You would expect Spider-Man games to get better and better after this game, and in my opinion, they totally have. At the end of the day, why I think this game is overrated is because I see and hear so many people still say that Spider-Man 2 on the GameCube is like the best Spider-Man game of them all, and I wholeheartedly disagree. I think Web of Shadows is better, Shattered Dimensions is better, Ultimate Spider-Man, which came out only a year after, I think is way better, and all of the Insomniac Spider-Man games kick this game's ass. Obviously, they all owe something to Spider-Man 2, but to still say all these years later that Spider-Man 2 is like the best Spider-Man game, or maybe the best open-world superhero game of them all, yeah, I'm not buying it. I still think it's a good game, I still have a ton of nostalgia and love for this game, but I do think it is a bit overrated at this point. So this entry is going to be a little interesting. I have really every Call of Duty after Black Ops 2. Now, I like the Call of Duty series. I've actually ranked every single Call of Duty, like we're talking all 50 plus of them. It's one of my longest ranking videos ever. But I personally feel that Call of Duty really peaked in the late 2000s to early 2010s. Modern Warfare 1 all the way to Black Ops 2, those games are all gold. And it feels like every COD 2013 and on has really just been trying to recapture the magic that was there during that 360 era. And there have been plenty of good Call of Duties, even some great ones, but none of them have ever been able to touch Black Ops 2, Blops 1, or the original Modern Warfare trilogy. And so when I've heard people say over the last 10 years, oh, this new Call of Duty is really good, oh, this one's great, this is like as good as the 360 ones, I'm really skeptical, and every single time I've been like, oh, this game is good. Oh, sometimes it's even better than just good. But it's not Call of Duty 360 good. Maybe I'm just preconditioned at this point. Maybe I'm just burnt out of the COD series, or I've got too much nostalgia and memories with those older games. But even all these years later, I still think Black Ops 2 really does like reign supreme over Call of Duty. And when I hear people say stuff like, oh, that new Modern Warfare 2, that's like the best Call of Duty of them all, or Black Ops Cold War, man, this is like better than some of the original Black Ops games, I'm just like, yeah, no, I really don't think that. While those games are good and they have, fantastic presentations and production, and there's actually a good amount of content in them, but they really just don't hit for me like the older ones do. Again, maybe I'm really just burnt out of the series, tired of the formula, but the thing is when I boot up the older CODs, I can still have a ton of fun with the multiplayer. I still think the campaigns hold up, and the other modes I think are still good. These newer Call of Duties, I don't know, I feel like it's a combination of factors. The maps just don't do it for me. The formula feels beyond stale at this point. I don't love how some of the guns feel. I don't think the campaigns are anywhere near as good as those older ones, and the extra modes like Zombies and now Warzone just don't hit for me like how Zombies did 10 plus years ago. Again, I might just be sick of all of this, but I do think the newer CODs are generally overrated. Doesn't stop them from selling like absolutely crazy though, and I'm sure there are plenty of people down below that will tell me, oh no, the newer CODs are where it's at, you're just too nostalgic for the old ones. Well, I'm glad that at least I'm not alone in thinking that the newer ones are overrated or not as good as the old ones. There's still tons of people playing the older ones, especially on Xbox, and so I can always just go back and play those. And so here's certainly an unusual game for a list like this. I have the original Nier. Now, when this game first came out, it wasn't all that well received. Critics were pretty lukewarm with it, and the general reception was it's okay, but over the years, Nier really built its reputation up. Then when Nier Automata got announced and subsequently released, a bunch of people went back and played all of the Drakengard and Nier games when they found out they're actually all connected, and it was then that I saw a bunch of people show up out of the woodwork saying, oh, Nier's hella good, the original Nier was an underrated gem, it's one of the best RPGs from that era, how did we miss this, this is amazing, it's connected to the new game, the story is just phenomenal and unforgettable, and I've seen people praise the hell out of this game. And it's kind of funny how much bigger this game's fan base is versus when it actually came out. But with that, I've seen a lot more people really praising this game, as the kids call it, glazing this game, and it's to the point that, yeah, I'd say this game, it is a little overrated. Obviously, it's nowhere near as overrated as plenty of the other titles I'm talking about on this list, but this is my personal list, and when I was thinking of games that I personally think are a bit overrated or really overrated, this game really did come to mind, and it's still a good game. It has a great story, there's some really excellent characters and twists. I even really like Dad Nier, even when he wears the thong over his face, and it's cool how many different endings there are. The music is also incredible, like it is so well done, but unfortunately when it comes to the gameplay, I have always thought the original Nier just completely crumbles. It just falls apart. And the more I play of it, the more I dislike the gameplay. I actually remember the first time I played this game, it was a few years after it came out, and I thought it was just a really mediocre, shallow action RPG, and I actually dropped it pretty fast. But when I learned about Nier Automata's existence, I went back and played through the entire game, and realized that while the story might be really great and there's some good themes there, this gameplay, it kinda sucks. It's a really basic action RPG with stiff, unresponsive combat. I do not like the combat in this game. It just never felt nice, no matter what weapon I was using or what I was fighting. I just really did not like how it felt. And you get some special abilities you can use that do help, but it just never felt nice. The combat didn't have a nice flow to it, and it was just extremely clunky. And then some combat encounters just take way too long, and the pacing can be all over the place, and the boss fights are just a mixed bag, straight up. Then there's some other gameplay styles that show up here where it's almost like a bullet hell or even a survival horror game at one point, and these just kind of feel thrown in there. While at first it's novel that there's a different type of gameplay, they're so half-baked that I just kind of wanted them to end. And speaking of end, it's cool how many different endings there are, but man, it is the biggest pain in the ass to get some of these endings. You have to do like all the side quests, and the side quests in this game are terrible. The most cookie cutter, bland, uninteresting side quests imaginable. Sometimes they try to have like a little bit of character or story to them, but most of the time, yeah, I could not care about these side missions, and eventually I just gave up trying to get the other endings. And while the music might rock, the presentation isn't very good. This is an ugly game with ugly character models. The frame rate's kind of sussy. Like, playing through this game wasn't a great experience. If the story wasn't as good as it is, I could tell you just listen to the soundtrack online and skip the game. But I've seen a ton of people online saying that they can overlook the shoddy gameplay and that it's just a fantastic experience overall, and I'm just like, man, what game did you play? I just could not look past all of these gameplay issues. What is great, though, is that the game actually was remade as Near Replicant. And this is the definitive way to play the game. This fixes everything. The gameplay is so much better. The combat's better. All of the sequences are better. And it's a much more enjoyable experience. It does change the story a little bit. Instead of playing as the dad, you do play as the brother, which is what the Japanese version had. And I know some people don't care for that, but I'm willing to overlook that for just a much better game. But what's really crazy to me is I have found people, and I'm not even going that deep into forums or subreddits or anything, but I have found people that actually prefer the original Nair to Replicant, and I'm just like, how? How? It's not even close. Replicant is by far the much better product. I'd much rather play that any other day. And so maybe I just need some new circles or forums or places to lurk in, but I think the original Nair, it's a little overrated. It's not actually that great of a game. The story's pretty good, and that's really it. So here we have a game I've discussed many times on the channel, but it is the original Need for Speed Underground. Now, I never played this game growing up. I didn't play it for the first time until a few years ago, but growing up and throughout the years, I have heard so many people gas this game up. Pun absolutely intended. I've heard so many people just hype this game to all hell, and maybe it's just nostalgia at this point, but I've heard so many people go, oh, Underground changed everything for Need for Speed, for racing games, for driving culture in general. It was this along with Fast and Furious that really changed how the landscape looked in the early 2000s, and that I can't deny. This game absolutely left a legacy on not just the Need for Speed series, but driving culture in general. But what I can deny is the amount of people saying, this is the best Need for Speed game. Need for Speed as a series never got any better than this. They need to go back to their roots with Need for Speed Underground. This is one of the best driving games of the 2000s. It's unparalleled all these years later. And if you look at the Need for Speed series and you look at sales, yeah, Underground 1 is near the very top of the list. But after playing all the way through it, all I gotta say is, I really do disagree on all those hyperboles I spoke of earlier. While I do think the game is a good game, it has a vibe that cannot be denied. The soundtrack is just kind of goated at this point, and the car customization was very good, especially for the time. I don't think this game is a great game. I don't think it's even one of the best Need for Speed games. It's a solid racing game, but I just had so many little issues with it. Maybe it's just the game not aging all that well and I don't have any nostalgia for it, but there were some aspects of this game that I just came to really hate, specifically with the gameplay. I'll just get right into it and say that this game has really awful, cheating, rubber bandy AI. Now, as somebody who's played literally every single Need for Speed game, I can tell you they all have rubber bandy AI. And they all just magically catch you at some point. But Underground 1 has the worst in the entire series, in my opinion. It's some of the worst I've ever seen from any racing game. They just always magically catch up to you, and it gets so annoying. Speaking of annoying, we have all the random traffic that shows up. The traffic literally just spawns randomly around you, and oftentimes it's really hard to predict if it's even going to show up, and especially when you start going at faster speeds, you were given such a small window of opportunity to dodge it that oftentimes you just crash right into it, and the race is pretty much over at that point. When it comes to this game in difficulty, I've spoken on it several times. This game is way more difficult than it should be. A lot of the times, especially towards the last half of the game, if you crash it all in like the third lap, you're done. The race is over. You're just never going to be able to catch up to the AI, even if you drive like perfectly, and it's just ridiculous. And some of these races absolutely get ridiculous towards the end, where they take upwards of almost 10 minutes and you have to replay it because some stupid shit happened at the very end. Now, there are other difficulties here, but they don't seem to do a damn thing. The AI just magically catch up to you every single time. And oftentimes they just magically catch you. Call it mad cause bad, but I just did not enjoy my time with a lot of this game. And speaking of time, you'll be spending a fair amount of time playing through this game. It took me like 10 plus hours to beat, and it got pretty repetitive by the end. The track design, while it's good by itself, you play through these tracks so many times that, yeah, it really does get repetitive. It gets stale and old and annoying. And then some stupid fucking minivan shows up and you gotta restart the whole thing, and it's like, that's not a fun experience. Doing this for hours and hours on end, that is not fun. While there are plenty, and I mean plenty of things that I really do enjoy about Underground 1, and I still listen to the soundtrack even nowadays, I have legit zero desire to ever play this game again. It just got so tedious and frustrating that I really wasn't enjoying it. And then there's Underground 2, which has its own set of issues, but it was a hell of a lot more enjoyable than the first game. And then of course there's Most Wanted 2005, which is just kind of the best Need for Speed game of them all. And I know plenty of people would say those games are overrated, but I really don't think those ones are overrated. The one that I believe is the most overrated of the entire Need for Speed series, and one of the most overrated driving games period, is the original Need for Speed Underground. But apparently I just freaking love this game. I can't seem to go like 5 or 6 videos without talking about it at some point. Hopefully this is the last time for a while. Oh boy, I got an interesting one here. I have Horizon Zero Dawn. Now Horizon is without a doubt one of PlayStation's biggest franchises, and it's clear they have long-term plans for this series. Now I like Horizon Zero Dawn, I actually quite like it, but I've always thought it's just a bit overrated. I much prefer the sequel, Forbidden West, and think that that's a much better game in several aspects. I think Horizon Zero Dawn has an excellent setting, interesting lore, and when it comes to the presentation, it's top notch. The game still looks incredible, and we absolutely do not need a remake or remaster of it, but that's going to happen regardless. But anyway, that's a different topic. To get to things that I'm not so big on with this game, I never thought the story was actually all that great, and I thought Aloy was kind of a weak character in this first game. And I don't mean weak like physically, no, she's obviously very capable and strong. I just meant that I just don't love her personality in the first game. It seems a little generic, and it's like they were still kind of developing what kind of character she would be. She's a lot more confident and a much stronger character in Forbidden West. I actually much prefer how she is in Forbidden West to this original game. I went back to Zero Dawn and was just like, wow, Aloy's character is just not as good in this original game. And the actual story itself, yeah, I didn't really ever care all that much for it. Again, I think the world building and the lore and all of that's really great, but the actual story that takes place in this game, I never thought it was all that. But of course, that could be considered nitpicky. When it comes to the gameplay, while I think it is still quite good, there are several areas that I'm just not big on. I've personally just never really liked the crafting in either of the Horizon games. It's tedious, it's boring, it's not really fun, and it gets old, and I just feel like we've been doing this for so long in games, and Horizon brings nothing new to the table when it comes to the crafting itself. You also can't grab crafting materials when you're riding any of the mounts. That is really annoying, and they fixed that in Forbidden West. I was never huge on the open world in this game. It just never really stood out much to me. I always thought it was a little bit more empty than it should be. It's kind of flat and ultimately was just kind of forgettable. When I think about Forbidden West and its open world, I'm able to recall areas. I loved how vertical it was, and it just felt a hell of a lot more fleshed out than what Zero Dawn has. And then we have the combat. I think the combat is actually pretty good, great even, but I have heard so many people just really hype up the combat of Zero Dawn and Forbidden West, saying it's some of the best combat in any video game, best combat of the generation. These boss fights are absolutely incredible, and while I do think there are some good spectacles and set pieces, and the combat is very dynamic, and at times it really is quite exciting, but I won't lie to you, if you look at a lot of gameplay for the combat in both Horizons, you'll notice a lot of it is just rolling around, going into slow-mo and pulling up the weapon wheel, popping a shot or two off, then going back to rolling around. That might sound incredibly reductive, and you might go, oh, there's so much more to this combat. There absolutely is more to this combat, but a good portion of the combat kinda is that, and this is coming from someone who actually quite enjoys the combat. I just don't think, oh, it's some of the best open world combat that you've ever seen before. Like, despite how many different creatures there are in this game, a lot of them go down the same way at the end of the day. Look, I think the combat is still fun. I think overall the game is actually pretty fun. This is all coming from someone who thinks the game is good. And I like the game. I just think the game is overrated these days. I've heard so many people just writing this game, acting like it was just this landmark, legendary title for PlayStation, and Horizon is a lot of things, but it is not that. Maybe it's just a case of, as the kids call it, the Sony ponies invading my timeline and circles and forums, hyping this game up when the average person doesn't think that, but I have seen lots of people pushing that Zero Dawn is just this fantastic title when I think it's just pretty good. I do think Forbidden West actually really does kind of live up to the hype, though. It really is a much better game in several aspects, at least in my opinion. I don't know if that's the hottest take, but I think that game really lived up to the potential and the hype. At least for me it did. And then I got to be part of the DLC's production, so that was pretty cool. But different story for different day. I have Horizon Zero Dawn. And so here we have another one of those Jonathan hot takes. We have Mario Kart 64. Now, when thinking about this list, 2 Mario Karts actually came to mind, Super Mario Kart and Mario Kart 64, but over the years, I've heard more people hype up Mario Kart 64. And while I think the game is good and it has actually aged relatively well, I have heard people for a long time say that this is the best racing game of the 90s, the best Mario Kart, the best racing game on 64, and you know what? I disagree with all of those. I don't even think this is one of the best Mario Karts. And you know, I get it. A lot of people just have a ton of nostalgia for this game. They've got a ton of memories of packing around the TV in the 64 with their friends, having a great time in the battle mode, or just racing around and messing with each other. And I'm not here to stomp on those or deny that. I myself have a good amount of memories with this game growing up as well, but I also have those good memories with like every Mario Kart game, and I think just about every Mario Kart game is better than 64. Outside of Super and Advance, I'd rather play legit any other mainline Mario Kart. And when it comes to racing games on the 64, Mario Kart 64 is one of the best, but the best? No, I've never thought that one. I've always thought Diddy Kong Racing was the better racer for the 64 and the best racing game on the 64. It has just way more variety when it comes to the tracks, the story mode's great, and we could be here all day talking about how I think Diddy Kong Racing is better than Mario Kart 64, but that conversation has been going on for 25 plus years now. We don't need to continue it here. I just think it's a better game. And I also think low-key F-Zero X is better than Mario Kart 64 as well. Mario Kart 64 has some pretty incredible tracks. It has a decent sense of speed. I won't lie though, it's not all sun and flowers here. There are some issues with this game. I've never liked how this game really controlled. Maybe that's just the N64 controller, but it always felt just a bit stiff. I never liked the drifting either. It just never felt all that useful, especially compared to other Mario Karts. But it is a step up from Super Mario Kart, I will give it that. In typical Mario Kart fashion, the AI do mad cheat in this game, with rubber banding and conveniently getting the right items at the right time. When it comes to the multiplayer and the battle mode, I really don't have any issues there. I mean, I've always had a lot of fun with it. The battle mode is good, and it really does still hold up. It's not like Double Dash good, where it's one of the best battle modes ever, but yeah, it is pretty good still. To continue my nitpicking, I've never loved that the characters aren't in 3D. It's the N64. We should have had 3D characters, come on now. And if I want to do one final nitpick, all I will say is that some of these tracks feel a little too wide and open, especially Wario Stadium, which, funny enough, is the only Mario Kart 64 track to never come back. And maybe that's for a reason. It's because it kinda sucks. Look, Mario Kart 64, I don't got a ton to say about it. I think it still is a good to great racing game. It's just, over the years, man, people really love to hype up Mario Kart 64 when I think the game's just pretty good. Not one of the greatest racing games of all time good, but pretty good. So we got another older title on here, and it's Persona 3, specifically the FES version on PS2. Now, there are tons of things I really do like about Persona 3, don't get it twisted. But when I hear somebody say that they think the best Persona is Persona 3, I'm just always so confused, and I have heard this for years. I've even heard it from some of my good friends who are like, yeah, this is the best Persona, and I'm like, how? How do you think this is peak Persona? There are other Persona games that are much better than this in my opinion. Sure, there are things I actually really do like about Persona 3. I think the story's good. I think the characters are actually really well developed and defined. The ending in particular is really great, and the soundtrack is just phenomenal. I love the music of Persona 3. The game also has a really solid atmosphere and vibe to it. And you know, maybe that's why people love Persona 3 so much. They just remember all of that. But I remember more than just that. I remember the gameplay as well, which had just a ton of issues to it. Let's start with the most obvious one, the fact that you can't control your party members in battle. This is just atrocious. The AI is terrible in this game, constantly using moves that miss or just won't work. And this was just beyond frustrating. It made this game so much more difficult than it had any right to be because the AI really was just that bad. When it comes to the actual battle mechanics outside of that, yeah, it's fine. It's typical SMT battles, and yeah, those have gotten better over time. This game does have a fair amount of SMT bullshit though, where you just get into a fight and immediately get one-shotted or some nonsense happens and your whole team gets wiped out like that, but that's kind of every older SMT game. So that's just kind of a case of it not aging all that well. My next big issue with the gameplay is Tartarus. From a gameplay perspective, I hate like every single aspect of this tower. There are over 200 plus floors to this thing, and nearly every floor is randomly generated, and the random generation just isn't very good. Maybe it's because the game came out in the mid-2000s, but this random generation just does not do it for me. A lot of these floors feel the same, they play out the same, the level design and layout is very similar, and it just doesn't feel unique at all. It gets very repetitive incredibly quickly, and it really does feel never ending, especially in the later half of the game where they just have you do so many floors, like floor after floor after floor, and I'm just like, please end it. This is awful. The dungeon crawling controls are total ass as well. It controls terribly, and I had so many instances where the enemy got the jump on me because the controls are so finicky, delayed, and stiff. And then oftentimes, if they got the jump on me, there was a good chance they would just wipe out my entire party in one turn, and it's like, thanks. I gotta redo a bunch of those floors now because the controls just were not working with me. Gee, isn't this fun to do even more floors? The dungeon crawling just needed a hell of a lot more variety to stay interesting for as long as this game is. Then there's the tired mechanic. I've never liked this mechanic, and I'm glad that they got rid of it in subsequent re-releases. Additionally, in the original release, there are plenty of bosses that are just straight trial and error, where the only way you can really beat them is by dying to them before, where you know that they can do A, B, C, you know what they're weak to, and of course they don't get a lucky shot on you or critical or some other bullshit like that. And all of this just leads to a tedious, annoying experience. Even though I like a bunch of aspects for Persona 3, I really don't ever want to play the original game again because the gameplay just really did not do it for me. Thankfully though, I'll never have to play the original game again. The game has been re-released several times. There is the PSP version where you can actually control your party members. I've never tried this version though. But we recently got Persona 3 Reload, and yeah, this is just the definitive way to play the game straight up. And it really does allow this game to absolutely live up to its potential and make it as great as it could possibly be. The story and characters and all that is pretty much untouched. In fact, I would argue it's even better in Reload, but the big thing is that they fixed the gameplay. They made the battles more like Persona 5's battles, and yeah, the game is certainly quite a bit easier. That I won't deny, but it didn't need to be that hard to begin with. The dungeon crawling is way better. Tartarus still does get repetitive and old, but the dungeon crawling isn't total shit. There's actually some variety. The floors feel different from each other. They even introduce a bunch of new other little mechanics just to make the floors feel more varied. It's just a much better experience. I've heard some people say they would much rather play the original PS2 game over Reload, and that, I'm just scratching my head. For me, there's just no competition here. I've always thought Persona 3 was overrated. I love the story and the characters and the music, but this gameplay was just not it for me. It always held the game down significantly for me, and I never thought it was a great game because of it. Reload though? Oh yeah, this is fantastic. Alright, and here we have the last entry for the list. The last time I can upset you folks today, I have the Battle Royale genre. Not a game in particular, yes, an entire video game genre. Now, when Battle Royale games showed up and PUBG really took off, I won't lie to you, it was hype. I got really into it. I have well over 100 hours in PUBG and Fortnite. I really played the shit out of both of those games when they both came out. Like, I don't even really like multiplayer games all that much, especially now, but those, oh yeah, they were a ton of fun. But then my interest started to wane, and I went, okay, I'm starting to get a little bored of these. What's next? What's the next big innovation? How are they going to mix this genre up? How are they going to keep it exciting? And well, in my opinion, it kind of has yet to do that. It just feels like we've been low-key running in circles. Like, sure, tons of other battle royales have come out. They've tried to all put different spins on things and change things up. And even Fortnite and PUBG have changed drastically from when they originally came out, but they're still battle royale games. And at the end of the day, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm just not really interested in this genre of game anymore. The idea of, dropping down, trying to stay in the circle as it shrinks and kill everybody else, I just got bored of it. I got tired of it, and I wanted something new and different. And with this genre, to me personally, it just doesn't feel like it's changed enough to where it's able to get my interest back. I don't know if it'll ever be able to bring it back at this point. Like, I tried Fortnite not that long ago. I think it was about a year ago, and went, holy shit, this game is like completely different from when I used to play it. Like, there's cars, there's a bunch of licensed music and crazy characters and grappling hooks. It felt hella different. But then after just a few games, I was like, yeah, it still is a battle royale game. It's still got essentially the same gameplay loop that it had all those years ago. And so when I hear people say, oh yeah, all I played all year was like Fortnite and Call of Duty Warzone, or my favorite online games ever are Fortnite and Warzone, I'm just like, it just doesn't do it for me anymore. Maybe it's a case of me just low-key being burnt out of multiplayer games in general. Like, I love my single-player experiences, but I'm just not interested in this genre anymore. And so when I hear that so many people still love Battle Royale games, they still play the shit out of them, these games get crazy high numbers, and it's their favorite games all year, I'm just like, That's not me anymore. I think all these Battle Royale games are overrated. Fortnite, Warzone, PUBG, Apex, even some of the smaller ones that showed up like Crew Motorfest Battle Royale mode. I just don't really care for them at all. And I don't know if I ever will care about them again. At this point, it really is hard to say. Maybe one finally does show up where it's able to have a compelling enough loop that I really am able to truly get into it again. But at this moment, the entire Battle Royale genre is just cooked for me. I don't want to play any of those games. And when it comes to multiplayer games, I'd rather play just something way more unique and out there like Lethal Company. That game has provided me dozens of hours of fun, and it's really gone on to be one of my favorite multiplayer games. Of course, that might be a very hot take. I know a lot of people still love their Battle Royale games, but I personally think they're all overrated at this point. They all have similar loops, and I've just gotten kind of sick of them all. And you know, maybe me being sick of them isn't enough criteria to get on a list like this, but it is my list at the end of the day, and these are all games that I feel are overrated. I'll say it again that I think all of these games are good. It's just, yeah, they're all overrated to a certain extent. So to wrap things up here, this was actually a really hard video to make. It took me a very long time to not only make this list, but record all this audio, write everything about it. Like, I've gone so back and forth. I'm hoping that this doesn't come out just some kind of incoherent mess, but genuinely, it was very challenging to talk about these games. I don't ever talk about games in this way, where I'm kind of nitpicky, I'm looking at the negatives, and at times tearing games down and saying why they're not all that. Like, I don't like talking about games like this, and to a certain extent, I didn't like making this video. I'm usually pretty positive about the games I'm talking about in these videos, unless I really do think they're ass, then usually I'll tear them apart, but I didn't have fun doing that for this video. I didn't ever plan on making this video, but so many of y'all wanted to see me talk about overrated games, and what can I say? You gotta give the people what they want. I'm a people pleaser. Here's the video. If you didn't like it, I'm sorry. I don't plan on doing another one.
And that's it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope it was what you were looking for. I swear this was not bait. I'd never intended for this to be bait. I genuinely felt this way. I'm sure I pissed everyone off at some point, but you can't really make a video like this and not piss everyone off. So if you made it to this part of the video, comment pissed, as in you're pissed at me or you're pissed at the comments. I'm sure down below it's gonna be gold. I'm getting out the popcorn. It's gonna be real freaking good. Hope you all have an excellent day. Bye-bye now.